Go, let's start. So, hi, I'm Ali Khan, and I want to welcome you on behalf of the SciBeh initiative to our workshop, Building an Online Information Environment for Policy Relevant Science. So as most of you will know, our initiative started in March of this year as an attempt to kind of create a context and tools for helping the wider behavioral science community contribute to the pandemic response. So our goal was to figure out how scientists like myself, who aren't kind of directly involved in any policy process, could make a meaningful contribution to the pandemic. And it was our belief then that what we needed was a sort of transparent, diverse online community for scientific exchange, not just between researchers, but ideally also between researchers and policymakers and researchers and the general public. And that if we had such a tool, we would be able to design better studies, provide early critique and feedback, and also focus on the most relevant issues for the pandemic. So to kind of put this into practice, we started to build an online information environment for which we used extant social media tools, Twitter and our subreddits, and drawing together information from these streams into an online database that included not just preprints or articles, but also tracked discussion as it unfolded over time. So unlike other big database projects, we were trying to pick up all of the sort of discussion and the science wherever it's happening. So 8 months on, we believe more than ever that such an online community for science is something we really need as scientists, not just in the pandemic, but beyond, and that we really do need a new and better information environment for scientific exchange. But we also have a much better sense of quite how much would be involved in fulfilling that kind of vision, how hard that is, and how many aspects actually need to be worked out, and how many aspects of such a project are actually raise real scientific research questions. And this workshop is an attempt to get people together to take the next step towards such a future. So there's 4 closely interrelated themes to this workshop that are reflected in the 4 main sessions that we have. And though they're separable, they really all belong together. So we expect sort of aspects of different themes to pop up across all 4 of the sessions. So one question is how we best make science open and transparent. That's of course not a novel question, and people in the open science movement have been thinking about this for years. And there's a huge amount of careful thought, projects, and expertise already in place. But of course, there's also additional challenges raised by the crisis and the need to move so much of the research process itself online. There's the kind of warp speed at which science is happening. And then there's the question of how to make it relevant to the policy questions that actually need deciding now. So those are not questions that have necessarily been at the forefront of the open science movement to the best of my knowledge. And there are probably things that we need to adapt or additional things that we need to put into place for the current context. Then there's the second question of interfacing with policy in the most useful or effective way for those of us who are not part of government advisory teams. And that, I think, is a crucial one. But we also need new tools. We need new tools from machine learning, AI, natural language processing to cope with the sheer volume and speed of the information in play. And then finally, what we also discovered is that once you start to try and move large parts of the discourse about science and scientific exchange into a public, transparent forum online, you realize that doing that, having a scientific exchange in public, isn't as trivial or straightforward as you might think if you want to promote high quality exchange that will maximize the actual goals of science, as opposed to, say, advertising revenue of a big tech company. So along with these 4 themes, we have 4 sessions, one on open science, which will be our opening session, one on interfacing with policy, one on building online discourse, and one on new tools. Those are our 4 main themes and sessions, and I'll now hand over to my colleague Don Liu Holford, who will give us a quick overview of how all of that's actually going to unfold.
Okay, so I'm just gonna share my screen because I've got some right here. Okay, so I think everyone should be able to see that now. Right. Okay. So just a few things about how the organizational matters. Our workshop link is the same for all sessions, so you don't have to remember new things, just click on the same link each time. We keep all information updated at the workshop website, which you should have received an email stuff. And there you can find the schedule. So the 4 sessions that Ulrike has mentioned, descriptions of the schedules are also linked to on the website. So you can read those as well. All the speakers are listed there. And one thing I'd like to point out especially is that we've set discussion forums for each of our sessions. Those are using Reddit. So I'd like to encourage all of you to post to those if you've got ideas and just keep talking about it even after the workshop. Okay, so during the sessions, as you can probably see, we set this up as a webinar so that we could accommodate the numbers of people attending. So we've got a Q&A function that will allow you to ask speakers questions. So that's, I think some of you will have found it already. And I'm sorry for everyone who has been very familiar with webinars all this while. For those of you who are not, if you do the Q&A, you'll get that little box that comes up and then you can type your questions. You can also upvote other people's questions or comment on other questions so we know what's the level of engagement people have with these questions. And that will help each of the session chairs to monitor the sessions as they go along. Alternatively, if there's something you really want to say, you can click the raise hand button, which is next to the Q&A, and we can then give you an opportunity to speak when there's a chance to. We've left the chat open so that you can actually discuss things among yourself. And one thing to note there is that when you send the chat to people, you want to click all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see your chat. Otherwise, if you click all panelists, it will just come to us organizers. We might still be able to pick up on it. My thoughts here would be, might monitor, especially if people are sharing slides, but we did want to have the chat so that you could still have those conversations among yourselves. And finally, after the sessions, we are recording all sessions, so just so you know. We will be posting them, and that's a link there where you can find the videos. However, we will post them on the website as well, so don't worry if you haven't got that link copied down or anything. We will have a summary of each session. Again, we'll update these on the workshop website as soon as we can. Please continue to contribute your thoughts on the forum, and if you'd like to share about the workshop, we've got a hashtag SciBeh 2020 that you can use. So do publicize this if you can. And one thing that we've got with the workshop that's probably a little different and not very conferencey are our hackathons. So again, links are all on the workshop website. You might see in the schedule that we've set up 2 functional meeting times. So they're spread over 2 days, and we've tried to adjust them over different times so that we can at least meet with someone in a different time zone on each day. And at the end of the last session, I'll try and post Zoom links to these. So all of the hackathons have their own meeting room. And we've got 3 hackathons, one on misinformation about COVID and climate change denial. So Steve Lewandowski is the facilitator for that, along with Gabe Stein. So please get in contact with him if you're listening now and you think, oh yeah, I'd like to join in that one, and you haven't already been contacted. I'm the lead for the hackathon on optimizing research dissemination. So if I haven't contacted you already when you expressed interest, please do get in touch with me. And finally, our last hackathon on a search engine process is led by Stefan Herzog. So his email should be there, and please get, oh yeah, there we are. Please get in touch with him if you would like to take part in that one. If you don't actually want to be in a hackathon group, but you want to contribute thoughts towards each of these hackathon topics, we also have Reddit channels that were sent out in an email before, so you can post to those channels as well. So with that, maybe if I could get each of the hackathon facilitators to introduce their hackathon a bit, starting with Steve.
You're muted.
Sorry, I know. I just had to find the button to click. Well, welcome everybody, and thanks for being here. Yeah, about the hackathons, basically, we start at 1 o'clock this afternoon, UK time, and run for 3 hours as we see fit. Each hackathon is going to be organized in its own way. I'm going to use breakout rooms and take breaks in between and resume whenever necessary. Each hackathon you can reach from the overall hackathon website, and I will just pop the link into the chat right now. So if anybody is interested in signing up or knowing more about the hackathons, the link was just sent out to all attendees and panelists. So yeah, so that's what's happening. We're having an afternoon session UK time today. We're having another session tomorrow that's even later in the day, UK time. The reason for that is that we're trying to accommodate as many time zones as possible. Some of them will make it on day 1, some of them on day 2. So overall, we're trying to allow pretty much everybody in the world to attend at some point. And our hackathon will continue till the end of the week, and our deliverable will be a video / documentary that addresses this relationship between what we understand to be climate denial and some of the misinformation and quote unquote denial we have been experiencing with COVID. There are differences between the two domains. And so one of the things we're trying to ascertain is how much of the so-called skepticism relating to COVID really is like climate denial. And that's it for me, Dawn.
So I'll just say those links to the hackathon are also, all of these links are in the workshop schedule that's on the workshop website. So you can find them there if you missed them now.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm just going to talk a bit about the second hackathon, which is on optimizing research dissemination and curation. So the problem we're trying to hack here are the gaps in our processes for sharing research outputs. So we want to try and find a sustainable way to balance rapid sharing of information with quality checks. So I think there have been some high profile cases where research has been shared rapidly, and it's great that it's all open, but then what happens if it's wrong? So how do we balance this tension? And one of the basic goals is that we're going to try and map what is the current dissemination environment. So where are all these platforms where we're sharing things? Where are we discussing it? Where are we evaluating the research outputs? And then we can assess these platforms. So what's working on them, what isn't working, and use that as a springboard for next steps. And of course, during the hackathon, I'm hoping to hear from all of you and get more ideas on where we should take this. So if you're interested in evaluating scientific publishing systems, this is the hackathon you probably want to join. And I'll let Stefan introduce his hackathon.
Hello, everybody. As Ulrike briefly mentioned in the beginning of the introduction, there's so much information out there, and we created this very eclectic knowledge base with what we call the good, the bad, and the ugly. So there is a lot of information in there. So in some sense, preprints isn't even the most recent information that's out there. There's the discussion maybe of preprints on academic Twitter and other places or could be valuable information sources to be harvested. And we have this process where we get, let's say, everything that's discussed, every link that's posted on one of our Reddits or things that our Twitter handle tweets gets into a knowledge base, and I'll just pop in the link there if you want to have a look at it in the chat. But there's much more that you can do with that. So for example, one concrete project that we try to create at least a prototype or a proof of concept is a very simple search engine of this knowledge base. So you can already search it, but it's not optimized for search. It's based on an annotation service called Hypothesis. But there are also other ideas that we want to explore. For example, here's just a wild idea. So if you have a digital object identifier, could you use altmetrics application programming interface to get reactions, let's say from Twitter and I don't know, in the simplest case, do a word cloud or something, just so that people can get a quick reaction. Okay, what is discussed about such an article? But this is just one of many ideas. So in this hackathon, we want to explore different ideas and come up with maybe one or two very simple, concrete, tractable things that we can actually implement maybe during this week, or at the very least sketch out how you would do it. And yeah, that's going to happen during the times mentioned in the schedule.
Okay, so that's it on the hackathons. Everybody is clear on the schedule where they want to be. All attendees presently here have all the information they need. If not, could you maybe put those in a question or a chat at the moment? So we're still missing one panelist and speaker for the first session at the moment, right? Speaking to more to myself here than to you out there.
Yep, so our first panelist hasn't got on yet. Okay.
Yeah, and Michele Starnini is not there too either.
Hackathon. Okay, so all the hackathons have 2 meeting times. The first one is 1 to 4 p.m. UK time. That's today. And the second one is tomorrow, 6 to 9 p.m. UK time. Although we set it up such that they might be they may not work for everyone, but then each hackathon will have set up asynchronous communication channels. So I believe that's Google Groups for the misinformation, climate change, COVID denial one, and Twist for my hackathon on optimizing research dissemination, and Stefan's search engine hackathon. So the reason for that is so that you'll still be able to contribute and add to group documents, even if you can't make one of the meeting times, or indeed both.
So while we just, I think, wait for the final panelists to emerge and put them on, I think now might also be a good moment to thank our volunteers. So one of the things that's been really great about SciBeh is that as this initiative has grown, there's a really, really broad group of people who've been contributing that span all career stages. And in particularly the database has been able to grow the way it has only due to the help of volunteers who are students. Many have now graduated. And there's also a number of these volunteers facilitating this session. So I want to give a big shout out to Marlene Wolf and to Marta Radozovic and to Jesse Ye, who are all here helping with this workshop at the moment today. Otherwise, I think we've kind of got all the information across that we need. So this might be a 5-minute opportunity for people to get their last cup of tea before we actually kick off in earnest with the session at 8:30. Again, if you have any kind of remaining questions, please put them in the Q&A or the chat box. And otherwise, we'll start on time in 6 minutes. See you then.
Sorry, one more thing there. I think some people have emailed in regarding participating in hackathons. So yes, please do that. If you can't find like which one you're at, just email us and we'll get you sorted into the different hackathon groups. Okay then. Right, so thank you everyone for your patience. I am Dawn Holford, as I've probably introduced myself already. So I'm quite excited to be the first one kicking off with this session on open science and crisis knowledge management. And as Iratxe has mentioned in our introduction, actually, although we've sort of organized sessions into a general theme, the concerns we're going to talk about don't really exist in silos. So a lot of these themes overlap, and there's going to be a lot of recurrent threads we come back to. And hopefully across the workshop, we get to hear from all these different perspectives, and we can get a better grip on the problem of how do we manage and share our knowledge online in a way that's relevant to tackling this crisis. So in this first session today, we're going to be talking about sharing research openly especially COVID relevant research, because ultimately we do want that research to be used. We want governments and organizations to use our evidence to formulate policy, to respond to the crisis. And we want that to be a transparent decision-making process. We want to see the evidence. We want to see how it's contributing to decision-making. So open science has a lot to say about that. And we're going to explore a bit today, where do all these pieces fit together? So a brief introduction for our 5 speakers we've got for this session. It's quite an interesting group. So in order of how they're presenting, we first have Dr. Chiara Varazzani. She's the lead behavioral scientist at the OECD. And then we'll have Professor Alex Holcombe from the University of Sydney, followed by Dr. Iratxe Puebla. I hope I got the name right. And she is the Associate Director at ASAPbio. Dr. Michele Starnini from the ISI Foundation for Complex Systems Science. And finally, Dr. Cooper Smout from the Institute for Globally Distributed Open Research and Education, and the founder of the platform Free Our Knowledge. So before I hand over to Chiara, just recapping a few housekeeping matters for those who've just joined us at 8:30. We are in a webinar setup, so we have got automatic mute for attendees, but you can use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen if you've got a question. So I'll be monitoring that. We've also left the chat open so that you can discuss things with each other or the other attendees. I won't be monitoring that too strictly. So if you want to draw my attention to questions, it's best to use the Q&A. And you can also raise your hand. So you can click the raise hand button if you want to ask your question in person, and I'll find an opportunity to let you in, join in the conversation. So I would like to hand over to Chiara to set the scene for us now. As I mentioned, she's the lead behavioral scientist at the OECD. And this is an organization that we know has championed open science in responding to the COVID-19 crisis. Chiara also has a wealth of experience in advising governments. She was part of the Behavioural Insights team in the Cabinet Office in Victoria, Australia, I believe, and also previously worked with the World Health Organization. So I'm quite interested to see what she's got to say. So please welcome Chiara to share with us her insights about the importance of research in responding to crisis. Chiara, please.
Thank you so much, Dawn, and nice to meet you all. Thank you so much for organizing this. I think it's a great opportunity to share a bit our passion for open science and trying to make an impact in public policy, not only in academia. I will share my screen. Give me 1 second. Let me know if you can't see my screen. I assume you can see it. I will just like to start by sharing some personal reflections on what I think about open and policy relevant science, especially during a crisis. So I will speak about the challenges of crisis response as a frontline worker really in government. Then I will share with you a little bit of results, some preliminary results, showing you how policymakers are still humans. And I will finish with a little bit of a discussion on a way forward. So first of all, just to share my background so that you understand a bit where I come from. I have a background in neuroscience. I did my PhD in Paris. And then I worked in London for the Behavioural Insights team, then in the federal government in Australia, and then in the Victorian cabinet, always in Australia. And really recently, I joined the OECD as lead behavioral scientist. So I have a mixed background of academic, government, and international organizations and consulting. So the challenges of crisis response, just wanted to start by saying that there's a systemic, of course, challenge to me, which is beyond the crisis itself, which is about the incentives for academia on one side and policymakers on the other side. So of course, we know that not only we have two systems that really work at really completely different speeds. So on one side, you have academia working most of the time, and it's nobody's fault, but most of the time it's quite slow. And despite the best effort of academics. And on the other side, you have government in which really everything, ministers, prime ministers, they really want the answer, straightforward answers, not today, but yesterday. Despite these, in my experience, I still had the opportunity to see some really good practices in government. So for example, when I was working at Beta, it was quite amazing what they did. Let me show you this if it works. So what they did, for example, is that they pre-registered every single randomized trial they're working on. So this is the website of the behavioral economics team of the Australian government in the Australian government. And as you can see, here are all a bunch of projects. So you see registered, all a bunch of projects in which before getting the data and before starting the project, the trial, they will publish a pre-analysis plan and pre-register what they're going to do. So this is really high standards, and I would say that it's not the first and hopefully not the last example of policymakers really setting high standards for open science in government. So let's say that COVID-19 definitely exacerbated these the challenges of sharing science and evidence with policymakers. Just because, and really I saw this while responding to the COVID-19 crisis in Victoria, in Australia. Really, you have more or less 2-3 hours to come up with some meaningful, relevant and robust evidence. Because the risk, if you don't respond as quickly, is just that you become completely obsolete. So policymakers will just make any decision, not based on evidence, but based on their intuitions or other things. So I'd say that it's in our best interest to be as quick as possible. But then, of course, the third point is, as I'm sure you know, being quick is really a trade-off with being robust. And of course, we know that there is a lot of pitfalls in rapid research dissemination. Just to share some of the personal challenges that I had, really one thing that is very challenging is to convey the evidence in a way that it's sensible with all the caveats around the evidence you're providing. So for example, it's very difficult to convey science in a way that take into account really all the limitation of the specific methods you use. So for example, in behavioral science, we know that especially during COVID-19, we all used a lot of reported behavior, right? So instead of measuring directly what people were doing, so were people wearing masks or were people observing physical distancing, what we did, what researchers, people in government, policymakers did was really to use self-reported behaviors through surveys. Well, of course, I'm sure that as behavioral scientists, we all know that there's a limitation to that, but definitely policymakers, they don't have that kind of sensibility to be able to disentangle what is good from bad evidence. So it's definitely our work to do so. Now I would like just to share with you an experiment that we did on policymakers. And it was an experiment where basically we asked policymakers in government to judge some scientific evidence and an outcome on public health. So what I'm plotting here on the vertical axis, the percentage of correct responses. And on the horizontal axis, I'm plotting the policymakers kind of ordered according to their priors. So some policymakers were already against this policy, and some policymakers they told us that were in favor of this policy. As you can see, people against the policy, so the policymakers against the policy, so on the left part of the curve, really wrongly interpreted the evidence most of the time. While when you presented, when evidence in favor of the policy was presented to policymakers already in favor of the policy, well, they were 81%. And it was the reverse case for evidence against the policy. So this is nothing new. It's just really to show you that policymakers are suffering from confirmation bias as anybody else. But interesting bit is that what we did was a little bit of a nudge, so an experimental manipulation with randomized frame field experiment, where basically we just simplified the evidence. So it was very easy, but instead of giving them just absolute numbers, we give them as well percentages. And what we found was that our manipulation worked pretty well. So policymakers suddenly became much better. So from 0% to 50% of accuracy rate, they become much better at interpreting the evidence. And it was the same for when they were shown evidence against the policy. So just wanted to say that I guess it's really, really important, especially during a crisis where decisions are made in the hour, to be as simple as possible in the way in which we represent the evidence. And the other thing is really to make sure that we are aware of our own biases and the fact that we shouldn't make any assumptions really on the way in which people will receive the evidence and interpret the science that we are generating. So just to open a discussion here a bit, as you can see, I have only questions and I don't have solutions. But really, what I would like to explore with you is things like how can we quickly generate and implement robust evidence and share lessons learned in behavioral science across governments. So not only in one single government, but really trying not to reinvent the wheel and try to share the evidence across multiple jurisdictions and government. And then really, how can we foster greater transparency in the community? So things like I showed you before with the pre-registration of trials online done by people working in government and putting online preprints and publishing now results. How can we foster this kind of behaviors? How can we put people, both researchers and policymakers, in a situation where it's easy to be transparent, it's easy to share? And then lastly, more technically, how can we in practice design or redesign a system where practitioners and researchers can register, publish, and share initiatives and experiments? So I believe that this initiative will definitely work towards that goal, but I would really love to have a discussion about what do we need to make this happen. And that's all from me. Thank you so much. I will stop sharing my screen.
Okay, thank you very much, Chiara. So first, I'd like to make sure that everyone in the audience has the opportunity to ask any questions that they want. Have we got any questions for Chiara? Okay, well, feel free to send them in because I've got one, which is, I'm very intrigued by what you mentioned about Beta and their expertise in pre-registering all the randomized trials. And if I've understood this correctly, this was actually for government decision-making. Yeah.
Yes, it was like we are researchers working in government. Mm-hmm. So all these randomized control trials are done by policymakers, people working in government on RCTs or other experiments on public policy, definitely.
So I guess there's a lot of incentive for researchers to try and make it transparent and usable if they can see it develop, if they can see it produces impact in their work, like the governments are using it. So what's the incentive for governments to pick up on that and use this evidence as opposed to other things that come up quickly and aren't pre-registered?
So I guess that there is two different things, right? So in my experience mainly is about researchers already embedded in government. So who are able to, really respond very quickly to, a minister asking for something this morning, and we are there to try and come up with an experiment in the following hours, weeks, months to try to answer that question. So it's not so much about researchers coming in with existing evidence and trying to have an impact, if it makes sense. But then your question is absolutely right. What are the incentives for policymakers and researchers equally to just pre-register trials? Well, I'm not 100% sure. For us, it's really about it's really about making sure that the impact or the results that we had are widely shared with the community, and as well is transparent. At the end of the day, government is using public money, so we are using, as a lot of researchers actually, we are using public money to do our research, and it's just correct the fact that we are coming back with, if it's about null results, we are reporting on null results. So it's about really closing the loop and closing the feedback of, I did this research, that was the pre-analysis plan that I decided to use, and these are my results.
Cool. Okay, so we've got a question from Steve, which says, do you have a link to the report of your research? It sounds super interesting.
Yeah, so I see a question here. Can I read it aloud so everybody is across it?
Yeah.
So Chiara, can you say more about what was complex in the original non-simplified version of the evidence that was misinterpreted? Perhaps you can give an example. So I don't want to spend too much time on it because I really want to give the opportunity to the other speakers to intervene. But really here, it was evidence around the efficacy of mandatory helmets, bike helmets. And so we provided the evidence in terms of outcomes of public, like lives saved. So it was 200 lives saved in this area versus 230 lives saved in this other area without that policy. And then we asked them to interpret the evidence. In the simplified version, instead of just using the absolute number of lives saved, we also use the percentages. So, and we know that our brain is actually much better at interpreting ratio instead of just absolute numbers. And the thing is that we have very, very limited time to look at this number. So such a small difference, it makes it like such a small manipulation, it can still make a difference, in a significant difference in the way in which policymakers make decisions.
We've got another question from Fabio in the Q&A. So he says, to the best of your knowledge, has any national government or international organization considered the option of creating a science curation task force? So a bunch of scientists devoted to monitor 24/7 and summarize all the relevant research being currently done on a relevant topic, such as COVID-19. So that's part one. And would it work in your opinion? If not, why not? And by the way, thanks for the great talk.
That's really an excellent question, Fabio. To the best of my knowledge, it doesn't exist. Then maybe I'm wrong. I think it would be an amazing idea. I would love to be able to tap into, you know, the expertise of so many researchers in the world, really expert in what government needs at the moment. So I think it will be a great idea, especially, you know, like we are all in different time zones. I'm sure there will be a researcher awake somewhere in the world, you know, at any time in these 24 hours. And I think what I would like to have as well, it's not only kind of, look, this is the evidence. Like I wouldn't like just these. I would love as well a little bit of quality assurance. So governments are actually making a lot of decisions based on evidence and science, and they are setting up experiment survey, etc. And it will be really good to have a sort of, you know, a reviewer in a very, very short time frame, where you basically you can have a sounding board 24 hours where you can just pitch your idea, say, look, we are using this evidence to do this. What do you think about this? So I think it will be really good, and we can think about multiple functions for such a platform.
And Victoria has mentioned in the chat that there are some discussions underway on this in New Zealand, but it seems to be the early stages. So that would be something interesting to follow up on. And I guess as from our work in SciBeh, I think that was one thing that we kind of recognize, that hang on, there isn't actually a consolidated effort to curate data. There's so much research coming up all over the place, and we don't know where it is, and there may be relevant things we're missing because we just don't have that opportunity to bring it all together.
Absolutely.
Okay. So before I move on to our next speaker which will be a discussion with Professor Alex Holcombe. Are there any more questions on what Chiara has shared with us today? I'll just wait a while for anyone who might be typing. Okay, so Louis Lacerda has put into the chat. Let me just open this up. Thank you all for the workshop and Chiara for the great talk. I came across with a database created by the International Network for Government Science Advice on COVID-19 Evidence to Policy. So yeah, this is INGSA. So this is a website. So it's in the chat with a link. So anyone who's interested can pick it up. And he also says, I clearly took your point about the quick turnover needed to work with politicians. How can we create the channels between scientists and government?
Yeah, so thanks so much for sharing that link. I will definitely check it out. I guess one thing that I would like to open this as a little bit of a provocation, but I think that even with the best database in the world, you still need to have a user-friendly thing. And like I would love for us as behavioral scientists to design something that, you know, people are really prompted to use, because I will be kind of concerned that maybe we're sharing all this knowledge, but nobody's using it because it's not a good product from the user perspective. So let's use our knowledge and expertise to design something great.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Chiara. So if we can move on now to our next speaker, Alex, and Zoom has seemed to have done something funny. So
yeah, I'm no longer listed as a co-host, which might be why it says my video is blocked. When I try to start my video, it says,
yeah,
you can't start your video because the host has stopped it.
Ulrike, can you sort that out? Hang on.
It's listing Michele as the host currently.
Ooh.
So he would have the power, I believe, to make me a co-host.
Okay, we're sorting it out, just a sec.
Ulrika is also a host.
I've been reset, but it still says I cannot start my video because the host has stopped it.
Okay, it should be working now, I think.
Now it's coming, thank you.
Okay, hello, Alex. So I'd like to shift a bit to discussing, like going deeper into open science now. And we've talked with Chiara about the importance of transparency in research sharing, pre-registration, generating reliable research for transparent decision-making. And that's why we've invited Alex from the University of Sydney for a quick Q&A on this today. So Alex has a background in cognitive science. He's a champion for open science, most notably in his role as chair of psychology in open science, which focuses on spearheading open access to research. Am I right? Yeah.
Psychology and open access, yep.
So as this is sort of like a Q&A, so I'd like to invite you all to just ask you questions as you go along, and we can have you all in as part of the conversation. So maybe to start with a simple question, maybe we ought to clarify this concept of open science before we dig further into it. What would you say are the key principles, key aspects of principles involved in open science? So what makes it open?
Well, it's a very broad umbrella, and thanks Dawn and Ulrika and Stefan and everyone for organizing this. Open science, I think before it really became a term, we had the rise of the term open access, and I think everyone here knows what that is. And open science, the first I sort of became aware of it was around 2006. So, my recounting is going to be sort of a potentially somewhat personal history. I don't know of any authoritative histories on this, but then came along this term open notebook science that was coined by Jean-Claude Bradley, a chemist, where his idea was in many sciences, people already record everything that they do, but very little of that, or some small portion of that, is what ends up in published papers. So his idea of open notebook science was to take those notebooks that chemists and biologists and many other researchers keep scribbled as a record of everything that happens, and including their much of their data, and just publish that on the web. But in that kind of transparency, can, for various reasons, improve things like reproducibility and being able to reuse research. But then, as the years went by, the open science term started taking in other things, such as the broader societal movement for greater diversity and equity in whether it's women or racial minorities. So, you can consider that quite a separate thing, but often when people use the term open science, they're thinking of that as well. And there are connections with just the idea of opening up science to everyone, to citizens. We've seen a rise in large-scale collaborations, which have been able to make better use of the variety of stakeholders and potential contributors to research. I saw that when we started an initiative called these large-scale replications that we started at back then it was at the Perspectives on Psychological Science journal, registered replication reports. We would have a large, high-profile finding. We would announce it as something that people could contribute to, and we saw labs that normally don't publish papers at all, but might be at places like teaching colleges, end up contributing valuable data to that and being able to be part of perhaps cutting edge science that previously they didn't have the resources to be a part of. And now it seems open science is used as a term to refer to transparency in all domains of science, including journal processes as well. So.
Yeah, it seems to reach into a lot of things, but some of the key points that I think you've mentioned there would be reproducibility, making it transparent to all to see, and increasing access. So not just in terms of people being access to data, but also being able to participate in the research. I guess that.
And historical, you can of course trace the history back further. The Royal Society of London, the oldest continuing scientific society, I think it was in the 1600s. They first started their little tagline, which is sometimes translated as "take nobody's word for it." So, and back then, they in many cases would have someone who had written in a letter to the Royal Society actually come to a lecture theater and demonstrate, in other words, replicate what they had done. So there was strong value on openness to some extent, although it was rather uneven way back then. And then with some of these strands, we actually lost until just 10 or 20 years ago when really the replication crisis got going and people started talking about reproducibility more.
So, well, maybe bringing it back towards the sort of crisis relevance of open science. We know that actually from the start, I noticed that you didn't talk about rapid data. So I'm guessing that this was never really a principle of open science, but now it's sort of getting around open science, in which we're talking about, we need everything needs to be shared as soon as it's ready, and it's got to be open. We can't hide it and then release it later because we need to address the pandemic. And in this way, a lot of preprints have really come to the forefront and become it's been discussed in newspapers and stuff like that. But then with that rapid producing of research, you get a bit of a quality control problem. So what are your thoughts on that? And do you think that does that all still fit under the umbrella of open science?
Well, before the crisis, 10 or more years ago, some of us were talking already about how we recognized that the file drawer problem was a big contributor to the reproducibility crisis, and just seeing large literatures grow on top of kind of selectively filtered results based on the outcomes. So we had this concept of like publish data as soon as it comes in. And so more than 10 years ago or so, I switched my lab to having everything tracked by GitHub. So as soon as every time I ran a participant or a few participants, when I would push to GitHub, the data would go there as well. So, but yeah, of course, the crisis has made it obvious to everyone that we need data faster than waiting for it to move through the black box of journals that often takes more than a year after, and that's not even counting, resubmitting to journals after you start from Nature and move on their way down. So it's been great to see this the rise of preprints, which I see as sort of an end run around this traditional kind of stayed kind of slow as molasses journal system. But I think maybe the last thing you mentioned was that it does raise some problems as well.
Yeah, so I mean, sometimes you put your work out there and you might not even be meaning for it to be wrong or misinterpreted, but then there's an error in there that maybe would have been picked up through review, and it's a genuine mistake, but then sometimes it gets out there too early. Let's say journalist picks it up, it goes big, social media blows it up, and then policymakers start to do things based on something that was a genuine error. So as a researcher, as researchers, what are our roles here in managing these preprint systems and getting our data out there? And how do we engage with that and be able to correct and make sure that the information that goes into decision making is still accurate?
Yeah, I personally think I have a somewhat provocative view that my opinion is that we've stuck with these kind of black box, completely opaque journal system for far too long. The internet started quite a while ago now, and journals have changed very little other than potentially making the output often open access. And so we really I think we have a responsibility to make the evaluations that we're doing traditionally behind closed doors inside the journal management systems much more open. Now, we've seen very slow moves by journals, maybe, but it's starting to accelerate to open up their research evaluation, but it's still usually it just comes down to 3 or so handpicked experts that happen to be the top of the mind or come up with a quick search that the journal editor does, when we could be harnessing much broader community and people with different angles on things. So I think our responsibility as researchers is to either abandon journals if we can't convince the editorial boards and the editor and backing societies of the journals we're on to radically open things up and join things that are latching directly onto preprints and thus are explicitly evaluating research that's already out there, and thus we can harness the tools of the internet to do better.
So I think our next 3 speakers have quite a bit to say about those points, actually. But before going into that, can I ask the audience if you've got any questions? Oh, there's something in the chat. Okay, so Ulrike says, Alex, David Garcia, who is part of the discourse panel, has been part of a project that looked at the politicization of preprints during the pandemic and how the provisional nature of preprints has been eluded in discourse on Twitter by talking about studies instead of preprints. Do you have any thoughts on how to manage this?
Well, I think I kind of enjoyed some aspects of that in the sense that I thought it's important for the public to get past the myths of science, as when a study comes out, that's been extensively vetted and that's the truth. I mean, it's this kind of thing that's contributed to the reproducibility crisis as well. So I think the public has been either misled and scientists themselves have overestimated the quality of the vetting that's done by traditional journals. So in a way, I've seen that it's good to see that myth is getting exploded, at least by preprints, and increasingly for journals too, because we've seen retractions by very high-profile journals such as The Lancet when when people have contributed some shady data related to COVID-19 in that area. But for preprints, I think it's just an education problem. We need to educate the public that a new study, the cutting edge, the newest study, is more likely to be false than when it's reported, or the way it's reported, than an older study that has had some time for criticism to shake out. So I don't think there's any way around educating journalists and the public to realize that, you know, science is an evolving thing. It's too late to stop the floodgates of the internet. So, but yeah, of course, we need all these tools that I'm looking forward to hearing about today as well, for rapidly vetting preprints or stamping them with some kind of imprimatur of various levels of provisionality.
Okay, so one more comment from Fabio. There are arguments against complete transparency in democratic policy making, because making the background process constantly observable from voters not only discourages shady dealings and corruption, a positive result, but it also prevents politicians from the sort of unpalatable compromises that are actually conducive of good government and make them behave as constantly campaigning for votes, a very negative result. So I wonder if similar concerns would apply to the scientific process as well. Is there any value in keeping some processes behind closed door in science? Could it be the case that transparency introduces undesirable consequences also to science?
I love that question, because I'm not sure I know of an answer to that where transparency is bad. But I mean, in politics, you've got this issue where you've got various stakeholders that want to come to a compromise, and there's intrinsically going to be a negotiation process, and you want to be able to float positions without your base realizing that you're potentially open to, or anyone else except for the people in the room, that you're potentially open to compromise until you actually see whether a deal gets signed. I don't know what's analogous to that in science. I mean, there can be consensus statements which I think we also don't have nearly enough of, that we have real difficulty signaling to the public what's the considered opinion of a large group of researchers. That is something that a whole bunch of researchers can sign on to. And when you're creating that consensus statement, there could be value in lack of transparency, in the sense that if I'm arguing with someone and I'm floating new arguments on the fly, I don't necessarily want everybody in the community to see that, because I need to take a risk in order to have that kind of dynamic conversation where I'm saying things that I don't want to be quoted on, because I don't want to lose some reputation by saying something wrong. So I can see maybe a role for that in that kind of process, arriving at a group statement.
Yes, I think there's sort of this tension between, well, what is scientific discourse as you're making up your mind about the evidence, and what is your position on it. And I think Iratxe has just mentioned that's something we will keep covering in the discourse session tomorrow, about how do we adapt to and take critique, and
for early career researchers too, when there's at least, and for any of us who also are not feel completely secure, when we were submitting our first article, for example, we want to have a route to be able to get feedback from authorities or experts without making it completely public, because we are trying to manage our reputation so much. So I think we need to preserve a route for people to find expert feedback that's not completely public.
Okay. Well, thank you, Alex. I'm going to move on now to our next speaker, Iratxe. Yes. So Dr. Iratxe Puebla is the Associate Director at ASAPbio, and this is Accelerating Science and Publication in Biology, which is an organization that's been working really hard on initiatives to speed up the process of science in the life science field. So I'll let Iratxe tell you more about this, and then share her insights on discussing, reviewing, and communicating with regards to preprints.
Thank you so much, Donna. Thank you for the invitation to be here today for a workshop that is on such a timely subject. I have some slides, so I'll try to put them up now and go off there. Just 1 second while I go into presentation mode. Let's see. Okay, hopefully it should be coming up now. Right, so thank you so much. Good morning, good afternoon, or evening, depending on where you're based. I'm Iratxe. I work for a small non-for-profit, ASAPbio, which Don has covered quite nicely. I'm going to be speaking mostly about preprints, but as a bit of context also for my own, I guess, biases of background. I used to be a scientist for a long time ago for a brief period of time, and then I moved into publishing. So I was an editor in open access journals for a number of years. And now as part of ASAPbio, as Don has mentioned, we have a strong focus on preprints. So that's the majority of what I'm going to be speaking about. Again, we are a small for-profit with a mission to make life sciences communication faster and more transparent. We have two main areas of focus. One is preprints, as mentioned, and the other is around transparency in peer review, which Alex very nicely alluded to. And I wanted to clarify, we take a very broad view in terms of transparency in peer review. This relates to journal policies, but also more broadly, there is a lot of peer review that happens in many formats and shapes, and we also support transparency of that. I had this slide to summarize a bit what preprints are, but I think probably the majority of the audience is familiar, so I'll keep this very brief. We have a focus on preprints because we think that they provide a lot of benefits to the scientific process by allowing research to be shared more rapidly, but also to researchers because they bring a little bit more of the control for the dissemination of the latest research back into the hands of researchers. So again, the traditional process of journals as we know them is that we would submit to a journal, may get rejected, need to do this cycle of submissions that Alex mentioned. And then usually it takes several months to have that paper out there. By comparison, for preprints, what the authors would do is post their manuscript to a publicly available platform. There is usually a light touch screening process. It takes usually just a few days. And it means that essentially by posting a preprint, we can really accelerate the pace to share the latest research and also be more open around requesting comments from other peers and the community and shape the paper based on that feedback. Our focus at ASAPbio relates to the use of preprints in the life sciences. They've been used in physics for almost 30 years now. So I mean, I'm always a bit mesmerized as to how in the life sciences we think it's a totally new thing. But it is true that for those working in biomedicine, the adoption was relatively low until recently, but there's been an increase in support since I would say the last 5 years or so. And while the use of preprints has been growing for the last 5 years, what we saw this year was a substantial change in how they were being used by researchers as the COVID-19 pandemic came to be. A lot of researchers took to posting their work on preprints to again try to disseminate the latest data, often in preliminary form, especially at the beginning of the pandemic, so that they could share that with the community and again share that with perhaps even doctors who were treating patients and they needed to know the latest findings to treat the patient that had in front of them. So at the beginning of the pandemic, we saw a huge increase in the number of preprints posted. And actually, given that the dissemination happened so quickly, in the initial months, a large proportion of the evidence that was available around COVID-19 was available in the form of preprints. I think at some point it was almost 40%. This distribution in terms of evidence in the form of a preprint versus a journal article has now changed, obviously, as the papers have been submitted to journals and have gone through the peer review process. But again, that search at the beginning of the year shows how researchers saw a benefit in finding ways to quickly disseminate their latest data. What we saw as well is that even though previously, again, the adoption within biomedicine of preprints had been relatively low, as the latest research was being related to COVID-19, we have seen preprints informing policy. I thought I'd mention a couple of examples. Again, you may be familiar with them, but the first is that the fact that the recovery trial actually, and this is an interesting example because the authors even first press released even before posting the preprint. So essentially they wanted the results of the trial to be out as soon as possible. So they actually press release the findings showing that dexamethasone actually reduces mortality for patients that need artificial respiratory support. And then posted their work within a few days as a preprint. And this was used by the World Health Organization to actually inform the recommendation for again, hospitals and different organizations to make use of this corticosteroid when treating COVID-19 patients. More recently, there was also the interim report from the REACT-1 study posted. I think this was around 2 weeks ago. And actually this was posted on medRxiv as a preprint, and the findings from that were mentioned. Again, those in the UK may be familiar with this, but there was a lot of evidence discussed as part of the government announcement that led to essentially putting the UK into a second lockdown, where we are now. This was one of the data points that was mentioned. So they are being used to inform policy in a number of ways. What we have seen, as other panelists have mentioned, is that as the latest research was being posted as preprints, they also attracted attention from the public and the media at rates that were unprecedented before. Before this year, it was quite rare to see preprints covered in the lay press. This totally changed this year as the latest research was being posted as preprints. There was a lot of media attention, again, trying to cover the very, very latest cutting edge studies. And we saw, again, coverage that was unprecedented, with some preprints garnering attention in the numbers of over 100 news articles. This was really a bit of a mixed blessing for those of us who are in support of the use of preprints, in the sense that while they facilitate the rapid sharing of findings, there is also this risk that, again, has been alluded to, about how do we actually balance speed with quality control. And we have seen situations where preprints were posted, reporting some results, and then they were picked up very quickly by the media. This is an example of a study posted in medRxiv regarding antibody seroprevalence in a county in California. I think it was back in April, and which garnered a lot of attention, again, from the press, from media outlets, but also was rapidly amplified in social media. So it was getting to a lot of, to a very broad audience, again, beyond specialist researchers. And what happened was that there was a lot of prompt reaction from the community as well, suggesting that there were some issues with the analysis and whether the conclusions were valid. But it is very difficult to operate in that feedback cycle and self-correction cycle while we have this other amplification of the message for audiences who are not necessarily within research groups. So something that for us at ASAPbio, we view it as an important tool to help find, or at least try to mitigate, find some balance and mitigate the potential risks of the rapid sharing of information versus the quality control, is that there has been a number of initiatives around reviewing COVID-19 preprints, providing public commentary that, again, is available to anyone who may have an interest in the preprint in itself. A number of these initiatives were put in place, again, as the research was coming out about COVID-19. Several organizations, again, these are hosted at universities, have groups of often early career researchers who have taken it upon themselves to review preprints, provide context as to what they fit within the knowledge around the pandemic, highlight any limitations, etc. They help contextualize the work. A couple of other initiatives are Outbreak Science Rapid Pre-Review, which is a platform that was already available prior to the pandemic of COVID-19, but it's obviously highly relevant. This allows the submission of rapid evaluations, which are posted publicly on the latest preprints, and it also tallies the evaluations and summaries that the members of the public are posting to give a summary for any reader who may be interested. Another item that I would mention briefly is the Rapid Reviews COVID-19 initiative, which is an overlay journal. Essentially what they do here is that they don't produce articles like the traditional journal. What they do is that they check for COVID-19 preprints, and then the main focus of the journal is to coordinate reviews that again get posted. So that's available to any reader who may want to have that information aside the preprint. And in a very interesting approach, they actually, I've seen them press-release the papers that they would like reviewed. So essentially they're trying to really amplify the message about participation in the evaluation of these papers. I thought that I would mention briefly in the last part a few of the activities that we have done at ASAPbio around the preprints for COVID-19. One of the things that we put in place earlier this year is a dedicated page on our website around preprints and COVID-19. We host a lot of resources for preprints in our site, but we thought that having a dedicated resource would be useful for anyone who is interested in how to find preprints for COVID-19, what's the attention they are receiving. And actually, we also added a section dedicated to the review and commentary on the initiatives, so that anyone interested could also have access to that. We have a project also ongoing, focused on the elements related to the media coverage of preprints. It's called Preprints in the Public Eye. Again, trying to do a little bit of work in finding some way of mitigating the potential downsides of research being rapidly shared prior to peer review and to the journal process. The three main areas of focus for the project are: the first one related to the labeling of preprints at the actual servers. What information do we provide with the actual preprint record? Can we try to make that consistent and as interpretable as possible? As it was mentioned earlier, let's try to make this simple and consistent so it means the same for everybody who comes across a preprint. And the two other areas relate to specific stakeholders. So how can we provide some principles or guidance to researchers and the organizations and their institutions who support them in dealing with the media, as to how they engage in any press coverage for their research if they have posted it as preprints, and likewise similar guidance and principles for journalists who may be looking to cover preprints in their stories. And finally, I just wanted to mention this event that we have coming up. Is kicking off on Friday, so I would encourage anyone interested to please join us there. We are running a design sprint around initiatives for preprint curation and review. So what we did was do a call for suggestions for initiatives that can incentivize preprint review. This can be a platform, technology, interventions with researchers. It can be of any shape and form. So we will be reviewing those on Friday. Again, we very much, even if you didn't submit, it's totally fine. We are hoping to have feedback on those on Friday. So there will be brief presentations and then feedback from the audience. And then we will be giving time to those who submitted proposals to refine the proposal and do a second presentation on December the 3rd with, where we will have judges assign small awards to the most promising incentives. So information about that is on our website. And again, I encourage anyone interested to join us for that discussion. And with that, I think that's it from me. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Iratxe. So just a question here about, yeah, these are all really great initiatives. And in the longer term, do we need to institutionalize this to try and ensure the right level of representation and the diversity of expertise and perspective? And if any panelists have a view on this, please join in as well. So Vera says, yeah, there's an overall limit in capacity for review because it's an unsupported resource. Maybe, well, I do know our next speaker is actually going to be addressing this in a way, this idea of, well, how do we recognize reviewing for what it is? But for now, what do you think are the steps to try and make this, to get people more involved in reviewing?
So, yeah, I mean, for me, one of the main interests that I have on preprint review activities, apart from obviously the added value to the research, again, in contextualization, is the potential to really increase participation and inclusiveness in the peer review process. The journal process, again, I've worked at the journal. It tends to be really editors asking the people they know who look like them to review. So we kind of perpetuate these clubs and groups. So I think that the beauty of review and preprints is that it can be much more open, it can be community driven. So I'm hoping that there will be some steps there in terms of encouraging certain groups who may participate less in peer review at the moment to take part in this. The challenge from my perspective up to now has been, to a certain degree, probably the fact that at a journal you have much more structure. So essentially, if someone tells you, "Oh, would you like to review this?" you are pretty flattered that that they've matched you to the paper and they consider you an expert. So, is whether there are elements to provide that incentive to certain communities. We had, for example, a community called ASAPbio just last week, and one of the speakers was explaining how he had created a journal club at his institution and actually work with institutional representatives. It would give credit to the students who actually participate, which I thought it was a very nice way of saying, well, this is good for you in learning how to peer review. It adds value to the paper, but actually you have an incentive for your own in terms of getting credit for your studentship. So I think there are ways of doing this that we should explore. They may need some structure, not as much as that of a journal, but I hope that, again, with little nudges, we'll be able to do that. The other element that I think will be very important, and it's been mentioned earlier, is that I think we need tools that are easy to use. Essentially, let's make these platforms as easy as possible to use. We don't want a tech barrier there in terms of participation. And the other thing from my perspective is that at the moment, even though all of these initiatives are great, they are not necessarily always linked to each other. So essentially, you may need to check 20 websites just to find 5 reviews on a preprint. And I think that if we had something a little bit more consolidated and interlinking between the different items, probably, it would incentivize this activity.
So one last question before we move on to Michele. Do you have any data on how many preprints get spontaneously reviewed by other scientists outside of your initiatives?
So that's a great question. And to be honest, it relates to the item that was mentioned about the interlinking. It's not so easy to actually gather this information. We ran an event in September for which I was interested in having that kind of trend element. Again, because there are different preprint servers and different initiatives that you can comment and review in different ways. But to give a number, in case it helps with the kind of broader range of what the level of the activity is, I think that at bioRxiv, which for the life science is the biggest preprint server, around 5% of the papers get comments. Which is something that may have changed this year. We did a bit of analysis on COVID-19 papers, but they are such a specialized subset. I would expect those to probably get more comments, but certainly there is a space and potential to try to increase that activity. Okay, well, thanks, Iratxe. Now, while we're on the topic of reviews, I think it's a great time to hand over to Michele Starnini, who is the author of an intriguing preprint earlier this year, because it introduced this innovative model to revamp the review system in a way that recognizes the contribution of review to scientific work. So I would let Michele tell us more about what he and his co-authors are proposing in this Principia system. I hope I've got that pronunciation right.
Yeah, absolutely. You should allow me to start my video because now it's blocked by the host, which I think it's you. So please allow me to start my video again.
Enrique, could you? Oh yeah, there we go.
Okay, great. Hello everyone. Hi guys. So I'm sharing this. Okay, now you should see my presentation. So tell me if you cannot see that. Otherwise, I assume that you can see it. So my name is Michele Starnini. I'm a researcher at ISI Foundation. And my background is in statistical physics, but actually I moved on something slightly different. For example, computational social science, network science, and data science in general. So thank you everyone for being here, and thank you for this nice invitation to talk about this work we recently put out, Principia, so decentralized peer review ecosystem. So this work is not specifically
Michele, but the attendees can't see the slides. I'm not sure if the screen sharing is working.
Screen sharing is not working. Okay, so good to know. Let's do it again.
Yeah.
Okay, what about now?
That's better, thank you.
Yep, okay, you're up.
Okay, sorry, let's start again. Now you should see everything. Is it correct? Good, yeah. Fine. So again, so thank you again for the invitation. So Principia, so this work wasn't actually specifically aimed for overcoming the current crisis of COVID-19 publishing system. Actually, something we started working about like almost a year ago. But we also think that it could be like important to provide some solution to the current crisis of the publishing system. Okay, so a little bit of context about peer review and why we started to work on this, right? Okay, so how does the academic publishing system work right now? So you can consider like the scientific ecosystem as populated by different actors. Of course, there are, for example, scientists who are the actors who actually produce science, and then they want to publish their science, of course, right? So they interact with journals. This J in the red dots. And they interact with journals in the sense that they send the papers to the journals, and the journals decide or not to actually review these papers for the chance of publishing these papers. They want to send out this paper to some referee to have their own, to have the opinions of these referees. These referees usually produce a report, send it back to the journal interact with the scientists and decide to publish or not the paper. So basically this scientific ecosystem is populated by scientists who can also actually act as referee, that's the important point, and by journals who are like the intermediate between the scientists, and they actually have like three main functions, three main goals. So they distribute the papers within the scientific ecosystem. Also, they disseminate the papers outside the scientific ecosystem to the general public. So they interact with the general public. And then most importantly, they check the quality of these papers, right? Because this is the difference between, like, for example, posting a paper on an archive, bioRxiv, PsychArXiv, a lot of medRxiv, a lot of public repository that are popular among the scientists, and publishing a paper in a journal, a scientific journal. Because a scientific journal is the one who actually go through the quality check of the papers. Now, it's important to disentangle this quality check, because it's not just about that the scientific journals say if a paper is scientifically sound or not, but they also, the publication in scientific journal also impact dramatically on our careers, because it makes a lot of difference if you publish a paper in Nature or in some, let's say, more specific journal of my field, for example. So it's not just about checking the quality of the paper, but also about prestige, or also about the scientific career. It's also about, let's say, ranking somehow these papers. Okay, so what's wrong with this current publishing system? Well, it has some issues. For example, it has increasing costs, and most importantly, the peer review process can be like a low quality. So let's dig into this. So as you know, there are currently there are two models for publishing. One is the pay-per-view, and the other one is the open access, right? So in the pay-per-view model, let's say the closed model, which was popular like in the previous years, basically you do not pay for publishing a paper. So you don't have a fee for publishing, but you do have a fee for access these papers, to access science. On the contrary, the open access, you don't have any fee to access the paper, so the science is completely open, but you do have a fee for publishing science. So of course, like the open access system is much better because it's completely open to the general public, which is eventually the one who pays for the production of science. but let's say it's slightly more expensive. So how much is it? Well, it's quite a lot. As you can see in this plot on the bottom of the slide, publishing a paper, for example, in Nature could cost you up to £4,000 or even higher. Now, the problem is that for a long time, this cost of publishing were hidden, because who pays in the end? Well, eventually, of course, the public pays for it, right? But in the previous model, the pay-per-view model, who paid were like university and research institutions, because they subscribe to journals, so they pay subscription. And so on the one hand, scientists were free so publications for scientists were at no cost. But on the other hand, this university pay subscriptions to journals, so they sustain the real cost for publishing. Now, with the open access systems, the cost for publishing is about science, which means that if your research group, if your lab doesn't have funding, you cannot publish. That's as simple as that. Now, of course, it's better the open access system because it allows the general public to access science. But this switch, this change of paradigm about who actually ultimately pay for the cost of science, made us realize that there is something wrong in the actual publishing system. Why? Well, it all boils down to money in the end, because so in the open science models, actually scientists pay journals to publish their work, their papers. So scientists send money to the journals. Then journals, of course, have costs, right? So the cost to distribute the papers within the science ecosystem, the cost to disseminate these papers outside. And then they have also some costs to actually undergoing the peer review process, right? So maybe they pay the referees. Well, actually not. That's not the point. So most journals, not all of them, but the great majority of journals do not pay referees. And so where are all these money go? Well, actually they stay in the journals. Because if you look at these plots on the right bottom of the slides, you will see that this is Springer, for example, but other publishers have similar profits. So the profit margin of journals is astonishing. This is I think it's a figure from 2016. It's a 37 profit margin. It's, on the left of the plot, you can see book publishing industry, which is about 5%. So there is no industry in our world that makes so many profits as the publishing industry. I don't know if you were aware of this, but this is a problem. Why is this problem? Because we as scientists, we like to think we are smart, right? But actually we're not. We're not, because we pay for work done by unpaid people. Editors are not unpaid, but referees mostly are unpaid. So the very core of the publishing system is the peer review, and it's done by unpaid people. So from people which is not paid for the work they do. And the worst is that we are those unpaid people. So we're really not the smartest persons in the world, right? And of course, if you outsource this very important work, so reviewing the paper to unpaid people, you cannot expect a high quality process, right? But so I hope I convinced you that there's something deeply wrong in the current publishing system. So let's go to Principia. So what are Principia? It's very simple. It's transparent. So referees are remunerated for the work. So referees, when they do peer review, they got remunerated somehow. Let's see how. Then this remuneration depends on the quality of their work, which is transparent. It's obvious, right? Then journals should be open access, of course, and cost effective. And then new journals should be easy to start, okay? So how can we do that? Well, actually, we can do that this is the scientific ecosystems as I showed you before. So the idea is completely decentralize the peer review process and to make journals liquid and let's say very different from the form we know till now. Okay, let's dig into this. So decentralized peer review, what does it mean? Well, it's very simple. The process of peer review is very simple. So if you want to publish a paper, you send it to a journal, right? Now, so a paper now it's characterized by two features. One is the keywords associated to the paper. This is the same as in the current system, right? So for example, if I want to publish a paper on astrophysics, I want to put some keywords there related to astrophysics. Now the difference is that now I'm bidding a review fee to pay for my work, right? to pay for the peer review work. Then on the other hand, there are the referees. So referees are characterized by 3 features. Basically, the keywords that indicate their area of expertise. So I'm available to review papers about astrophysics or whatever. Then I have a review fee, which is not the money, let's say, which is the fee that I ask for doing work, for doing the peer review process. And then the third and most important feature is that I have a reputation score as a referee, right? And at this point, you see that you only have to do a match. To do a match between like the fee, which is bid by the scientists who want the work to be peer reviewed, and the referee that can do this work, right? So you basically want to solve this equation. So you want the fee to be equal to the sum of the review fee asked by a number of referees, for example, 4 referees. And the important point is that, of course, you want to choose the lowest fee asked by the same reputation score. So if there are 2 referees which are available with the same reputation score, but one is asking a lower fee, then you assign that paper to that referee. So it's just a matching process. So if I submit the paper, I'm bidding every review fee, and then the system is assigning this paper to a number of referees, right? Now, how does this go on? So the peer review process is very similar to the current one. Step 1 is exactly the same. So I read the paper and I write a report and I assign a score to that paper, saying that, okay, this paper is good, it's bad, I mean, these issues, these flaws, these things should be corrected, and so on and so forth. And I also assign a score to the paper. The second step is the new one. The second step, after doing this, after sending the report to the system, I receive the reports of the other referees. This is something that already happens in some models, right, for some journals. And then I read these reports and I assign a score also to these reports. So what happens next? Well, at the end of the peer review process, the paper is got accepted if it's above some certain score, which can depend on the field and so on and so forth. Now, most importantly, now the referees collects the fee they asked in the beginning only if the average score of the report as evaluated for the other referee is above a certain threshold. This is very important because now the quality of the paper is checked by this process. And in particular, now the paper is published in the system, not just like, okay, this paper is published, it's fine, it's scientifically sound, it's a good paper. No, it's published together with 3 things. The score it got, the average score it got, then the reports of each referee, which are public. It can be anonymous or not, but this is not the point. The point is that you got a report published together with the paper and the scores for each report. And the third thing, the reputation score of all the referees that performed the peer review process. So this is something that actually certifies not only that the paper is scientifically sound or not, but also the quality in the end of the paper. So the idea is that, then I will be back to this, but the idea is that if I got my paper reviewed from referees with a very high reputation score, that certifies that my paper is really good. It's equivalent to publish a paper in Nature, for example. Now, the second important thing is that if the referee collects the fee only if the average score of his report is high, that is an incentive for high quality reports, because otherwise I don't collect the fee. And then after that, my reputation score is updated by the average report, by the average score of my report. So I have a strong incentive to do high quality reports, because otherwise I don't collect the fee, first thing. And second, my reputation score is updated. So as you see, like the reputation system is at the core of this new peer review process, in the sense that my reputation score indicates my quality as a referee. As much as citation, H-index, whatever you want, can indicate, let's say, in a very rough form, but let's say the quality of my research. So the important point is that this reputation score is completely independent from H-index, citations, and so on, right? It's something that only refers to my quality as a referee, okay? Then my reputation score directly impacts the fee that I can ask, of course, because if I ask a fee which is higher than the average fee which is asked in the market from people from reputation score similar from my reputation score, of course I got no papers to review. So as a referee, I have incentives for writing actually high quality reports to increase my reputation score, and then can ask higher fees, right? Then as an author, I have incentives to bid high fees to secure referees with high reputation score, right? Because if my paper got accepted, right, and it's reviewed by referees with high reputation score, that means that my paper is a high quality paper, equivalent to publish a paper in Nature. Of course, bidding a high fee doesn't ensure that your papers got accepted. That has only to do with which are the referees which will be selected to do the review process, the peer review process, sorry. So now it's important to understand that the whole system is based on the reputation score, and the reputation triggers the fee that you can ask. So these fees in the end are not something which are fixed, but it's something that can fluctuate. So this is a real market. It's a real market. It's a real decentralized market where the match is done between the demand for peer review for authors and the supply of peer review provided by referees, right? So the review fees are the tool that actually allow this match to be effective. Now, what about journals? Now, of course, like I don't want to go into the whole details of the paper, because this is a white paper you can find out, and then I'll post the link in the chat. But very, very briefly about journals, you can also include journals in these systems, liquid journals. So journals in these systems are something that have a score, a journal score which depends on the quality of the paper they publish as the impact factor in the current form. This doesn't change. Now, the point now that the journals can join by the scientists, right? So you can join the journals at any time by bidding a journal fee. As much as basically you want to bid like a review fee to get your peer review process done. So you can join journals, you can lead journals and form new journals. And the important thing is that your reputation score of scientists depends on the quality of the journals you join, right? And of course, like since like journals now are not like the journals we know, the peer review processes can be like entirely done within the journals. So now in this system, like the incentive is for scientists to join high quality journal to have a high reputation score, and for journals to publish high quality papers to increase their journal score. Now, this part of the journals, I didn't go into so many details, but it can be implemented as well. Now.
Okay, I'm sorry, Michele.
That's it. The last slide is like really to thank my collaborators in this, and I'm bringing from, which is like a chief technical officer at Exogen, Mario Domenico, who is head of complexity lab at Fondazione Bruno Kessler, and Evelyn Kelly, who's a lecturer at City University, Daniel Marinazzo at Ghent University, myself, I'm here. And that's it. And we have a nice website, which is principio.network, which gives all the details about this system, which is actually powered by blockchain. Now, I didn't have time to go into details, but we really think about how this thing can be put in practice. And the last thing I would like to say is that this is it's really very open in the sense that we will really like feedback, but also people who want to join this project. It's really an effort which requires a community effort, let's say. I will shut up. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Michele. I'm going, because I'm very aware we're running towards the end of the session, I'm going to hand over to Cooper to tell us about his Free Our Knowledge platform initiative. And if we've got a lot of questions for Michele, but would you be able to answer those by typing in the chat as we go along? And we will save all the questions to make sure we get you guys answers. So if I just hand over to Cooper right now, please. Yes, thank you.
I think I'm sharing my screen. Is that working?
Yes, that's working for me.
Okay, cool. Just let me know if it stops working or if my audio drops off, because I don't think I have the best connection. So thank you for Dawn and all the other organizers for inviting me here. I want to tell you about a project that I started about 2 years ago called Free Our Knowledge. And basically what this project is trying to do is accelerate the uptake of open science practices. And it's based on the broad premise that what we have in academia is known as a collective action. So if you don't know of this term, basically it occurs anytime the individual fails to achieve a favorable state due to conflicting. And so there's all kinds of collective action problems in academia, different open science practices. But what I wanted to zero in on was what got me interested in open science in the first place, which is open access, what has been called the Faustian grip of academic publishing. And from studies that academics are all on board for open access generally. The principle sits well with us, but there's much higher rates of desire for open access than actual compliance in publishing open access. And this has been written about extensively. Effectively, what we have is a self-fulfilling prophecy where these legacy journals, due to their existing reputation that we as a community have built up over the last centuries, have this certain level of prestige, which means that people want to publish in these journals, means that those journals then get the best pick of the different research, and that then attracts higher rates of citation, in part just due to their reputation itself. And this means that it's very difficult for new systems to get started. And the last talk is a great example, along with all of the other kind of initiatives that have been proposed, like Octopus, fair open access. Over the last 2 decades, we've seen all of these different platforms try to get a foothold in the publishing industry. And unfortunately, due to this collective action problem, many of them have failed. And just to highlight this, back in 2002, Parks made this proclamation that due to these conflicting incentives in the various stakeholders in academia, that it was difficult to imagine the academic community getting on board with these free electronic forms of distribution. And unfortunately, he's been largely proven correct. So what this project is trying to do is not replicate the same mistakes of the last couple of decades and think about ways that we as a community can work together to accelerate progress on open science and reach those aims that we all want to achieve. And the main mechanism that we're proposing with this project is known as collective action. And this, of course, isn't a new concept. Think of any workers' union strike. People have been going on strike for centuries. But the point of this process is that it only works if you get a critical mass of people together to take action together. So in a workers' strike, you get everybody at the factory to go on strike with you, and then you demand better pay or better conditions or whatever it is. And then that means that the individuals that want to take action don't get penalized by the system. Now, in more recent years, we've seen this kind of process has been harnessed online. So everybody is probably familiar with Kickstarter. And what Kickstarter is doing is solving a collective action problem to organize a critical mass of capital to create products that the consumers want to have. And then they benefit because they get a cheaper product. So you can think of this project as being a Kickstarter for behavioral change, where what we're trying to do is accumulate behavioral capital so that we can then use that to kickstart new systems and new cultural norms in academia that benefit all of us. So this is how it works. Any researcher can propose a campaign using the platform. And this might be something like asking your peers to pre-register a study, or say adopt a new platform that's been released, like pre-review or Principia, like we just heard about. And then you put that campaign out to the crowd and basically ask your peers to pledge to support that campaign. So one campaign, for example, might ask people to post a review on one of these platforms, but not until when you've got, that pledge doesn't become active until you've got a critical mass of support. So for example, you might ask for a target of 100 people. And then once you've got that 100 people have signed up to that campaign, then everybody acts together. And the idea here is that up until that point, everybody is protected because they don't have to take any action and don't have to go like out on their own, out on a limb. But when you've got the critical mass of support, then you can all take action together and protect one another in the process. So the way that works is that once we reach that target, then we list everybody who has pledged to that campaign on the website, and we contact them via email and ask them to carry out the action that they've pledged. So the broad vision for this project is to start using collective action in ways that we haven't been before, and push the boundary of academia in multiple directions all at once. So this might be open peer review, it might be open access, you name it, any kind of progressive behavior that we think we should be adopting, and to push the boundaries of academia in a general direction towards open science. We all have different visions of how that might go, but to me, as long as we're kind of pushing academia in the general direction, then eventually we'll get there. So I just thought I'd very briefly, because we don't have long, 3 minutes, show you the campaigns that we've run previously. So these were the 3 campaigns that we launched a year ago, and I designed them as this kind of stepwise progression towards what I think is the optimal model, which is a fee-free open access model. And so there were 3 campaigns included: green, gold, and platinum open access. And basically each of these campaigns just asked researchers to commit to publishing in a limited set of journals that adopted these particular progressive practices. There's a bunch of pledge options, which I won't go into. I'll give you an update on those campaigns. They've been running for about a year. We've got 200 users on the platform, some of you who haven't pledged but have just signed up to be involved. And at this stage, we have 148 pledges across those campaigns. Some of the feedback, which clearly isn't enough at this point, particularly for the parameters that we set out to achieve, but some of the feedback that we've got from at this point is that those campaigns were a bit too complicated, and also some people weren't sure that they would gain momentum. And so that feedback has fed into what we're doing now with the new series of campaigns. And these campaigns are intended to be quite simple. So all we're going to ask for initially is just people to commit to a single action, and also to target much smaller thresholds. So we're looking to target, say, 100 people. And then once we get that 100 people, then everybody takes that single action together. And the idea is if we can start small, get some successes, then we can work out which campaigns are being successful and then build on those to have ever larger campaigns down the track. Another thing we're doing now and have been developing this year is using GitHub to design these campaigns. And so now if you go to our GitHub, you'll see that there's around 12 or 13 campaigns have been proposed, including some campaigns that might interest people here, like open peer review. And the idea is that we can get, that people can comment on the open and develop these campaigns together and start to build a community prior to the campaigns being launched. And so I wanted to highlight just one of those campaigns, which our very own Don Lou Holford has proposed, and we've been developing with a few other researchers. And this is a pre-registration campaign. So this will very simply ask people to pledge to pre-register at least one study in the next 2 years. And when we get 100 researchers in any particular field to sign that campaign, then we'll all carry out that pledge from that point forward. Just a minor point, we're waiting on some platform development to get that campaign out in the world, but hopefully in the next couple of months, that'll be online. So that's the very quick summary of the project. Here are some ways you can get involved, and would really love it if people can. So first, you can follow us on Twitter and Facebook at Project FOC. It would be great if you could go to the website and register. You can log in using ORCID. I noticed a bug the other day where it's a bit weird. You have to open ORCID in another tab and log in there, but I'll try and get that bug fixed. And of course, if you're interested in pledging to any of the campaigns that are already up, please do. But mostly what we need right now is people to get involved via GitHub. So if there are any campaigns that you out there think we could run and would like to see a critical mass of support, say to support Principia or to support preprints, then you can propose that campaign on our GitHub, and we can start discussing what the parameters of that campaign might look like. And then eventually, once the platform's developed, we can get it out there on the website. So yeah, thank you to everyone who has contributed so far, including Dawn. I didn't have space to list everyone here, but down the bottom is also some organizations that have committed to partnering with this project. And if you're involved with an initiative out there that would like to partner with us, then please get in touch, because we'd love to increase our reach. Thank you.
Right. So thanks very much, Chiara, and thanks all of our panelists. I'm sorry we've run a minute over, and there were plenty of questions. So if you would like to, we'll leave this open. If you'd like to put your questions and things in the Q&A and chat, we'll make sure they at least get to the speakers so that they can be answered. And so with that, thanks very much for being here early or late, wherever it is you are. We're going to take a break now. And we have our next session in half an hour. This window should still be open, and it's the same link to join. So yes, thank you everyone for being a part of this first opening session.